The classroom buzzed with nervous energy. Students shuffled their papers, fidgeted in their seats, and exchanged whispers, all while Mrs. Thompson stood at the front of the room, her back to them as she wrote something on the whiteboard. The moment was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that only comes before something big, something unknown. "All right, class," Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the chatter, causing everyone to sit up straighter. "I've got a challenge for you today. A problem I expect to see some real effort on. This is no ordinary math question, and frankly, most of you won't be able to solve it. But I expect you to try. No shortcuts, no easy outs." She turned around to face them, and the room fell silent. On the board, she wrote, "Solve the following equation. It's designed to test your abilities beyond what you've learned so far. You'll need to think critically, creatively, and logically. Good luck." The equation sprawled across the whiteboard, far longer and more complex than anything they'd encountered this year. It wasn't just a math problem, it was a puzzle, a beast that seemed to mock any student who dared approach it. The problem was one of those that, at first glance, made your heart race and your mind freeze in fear. A murmur spread through the room. Students glanced at each other, exchanging looks of disbelief and apprehension. Mrs. Thompson stood, watching them carefully, her lips barely curved into a faint smile that suggested she knew exactly how they were going to react. "Who thinks they can solve this?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. A few tentative hands were raised, but there was one student who didn't raise his hand, Jamal. Jamal sat in the back corner of the classroom, his face calm, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He hadn't reacted to the equation at all. Most of the other students were already scribbling down formulas, trying to make sense of the mess on the board, but Jamal sat there, still as a stone. His classmates were too busy doubting themselves to notice, but Mrs. Thompson caught it. She noticed how Jamal sat back, observing everything with a slight tilt to his head. His mind was working. She could see it in the way he stared at the board without the slightest hint of panic. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't intimidated. Jamal had always been different, and Mrs. Thompson hated to admit it, but she didn't trust him. You see, Jamal had a reputation at Liberty High, a reputation that wasn't easily shaken. He was the quiet kid, the one who sat in the back of the room, never seeking attention, never really trying to stand out. And yet, for some strange reason, he always seemed to do well in class. Almost too well. Mrs. Thompson had seen his grades. She knew he had potential, but she also knew the kind of student Jamal was. He wasn't the star athlete, the class president, or the popular kid. He wasn't the one teachers talked about with pride. Instead, Jamal was the one who flew under the radar, the one they never quite understood. He was the quiet black kid, the one who didn't make a fuss when people doubted him, the one whose every success felt like a small victory against the world's expectations. And Mrs. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that Jamal was just another example of someone who had been handed an opportunity but wouldn't truly rise to it. So when she saw him sitting back and watching the chaos unfold without moving a muscle, she smirked inwardly. Maybe I've been right all along, she thought. Maybe this is too much for him. Maybe he'll fail just like everyone else. She moved closer to Jamal's desk and leaned down slightly, making sure to keep her voice low enough for only him to hear. Don't bother, Jamal. I don't expect you to solve this, she said, the words laced with a condescending tone. She saw the flicker in his eyes, the briefest spark of irritation before he quickly masked it. Jamal didn't respond. He simply nodded, his face remaining neutral. The clock ticked on, and the students worked in silence, struggling to decipher the problem. Most of them were already overwhelmed, their heads buried in their hands, some of them whispering to their friends about how impossible the problem seemed. Jamal, on the other hand, kept his eyes on the board, his mind ticking away, sorting through the equations, piecing together a solution. While Mrs. Thompson stood at the front of the room, hands on her hips, feeling smug in the knowledge that she'd issued an impossible challenge, she wasn't expecting what happened next. As the minutes dragged on, she continued to monitor the class, pacing up and down. She glanced over her shoulder at Jamal again, just in time to see him pick up his pencil, scribble something on his paper, and then quickly cross out his work. The faintest hint of a smile crept onto her face. She felt certain that he'd hit a wall like everyone else. She was sure of it. "Don't give up too soon, Jamal," she said loud enough for the class to hear, her voice dripping with mock encouragement. "You've got a lot of work ahead of you." Jamal didn't respond. He just kept writing. As the bell rang at the end of the class, Mrs. Thompson dismissed the students with a final, dismissive glance toward Jamal. "Don't forget, the solution is due by Friday. But I don't expect much from anyone, especially you." Jamal stood up and walked out of the room without a word. Mrs. Thompson watched him go, her thoughts swirling. It was clear to her now, he was the one she'd have to keep an eye on. She was already convinced he wouldn't be able to solve the problem. And yet, there was something in the way he carried himself that told her he might just surprise everyone. As the last of the students filed out of the room, Mrs. Thompson's eyes lingered on the empty desk where Jamal had been sitting. She didn't know it yet, but this challenge would be the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change not only her opinion of Jamal, but also the way everyone saw him. And the way Jamal saw himself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The bell rang sharply, signaling the end of another school day. Jamal gathered his things, stuffing his notebook and a few loose papers into his backpack, not bothering to rush. He wasn't like the others who scrambled to leave, eager to hang out with their friends or get home to start the weekend. For Jamal, life outside school was a bit different. It was quiet, often too quiet, but that was the way he preferred it. As he walked out of the classroom and into the bustling hallway, the usual chaos of Liberty High School surrounded him. Students laughed, shouted, and bumped into each other as they made their way to the exits. Jamal, though, moved with the same steady, almost deliberate pace, as if he were in a world apart from the others. He walked past clusters of students, the noise and chatter fading into the background. To them, Jamal was just another student, another face in the crowd. But to him, the world outside school was where he felt truly seen, or perhaps, where he felt truly invisible. Jamal's journey wasn't one that most people understood, certainly not the kids in his class, and definitely not Mrs. Thompson. They saw him as a quiet kid, an enigma. They assumed he was just another student who got by with minimal effort, someone who would blend in and go unnoticed. But the truth was far more complicated. As Jamal stepped outside, the cold air of late autumn hit his face. He zipped up his jacket and made his way to the bus stop, the rhythmic sound of his sneakers on the pavement echoing in the otherwise still street. His mom, Carla, was working a late shift at the local diner again, which meant he'd be alone for the evening. The thought didn't bother him. It never did. Jamal was used to being on his own, finding comfort in the silence that surrounded him at home. But while he may have been alone in the physical sense, Jamal was never truly alone in his thoughts. The pressure he felt to succeed weighed on him every single day, and the doubts, especially the ones planted by people like Mrs. Thompson, stayed with him long after the school bell had rung. He had always been the kid who was overlooked, the one whose potential seemed to get lost behind the stereotypes. Jamal's childhood had been shaped by those stereotypes. Growing up in a small, mostly black neighborhood in the heart of the city, Jamal had seen it all, the struggle, the resilience, the quiet strength that people like his mom had to carry every day. Carla was a single mother, working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Jamal's father, who had never been much of a presence in his life, had disappeared when he was just a baby, leaving Carla to raise him on her own. Despite the hardships, Carla had always emphasized the importance of education. "Your mind is the one thing no one can take from you," she would tell him, day in and day out. It was a mantra that Jamal carried with him everywhere, from the classrooms of Liberty High to the streets of his neighborhood. But even with that piece of wisdom always in the back of his mind, Jamal couldn't escape the judgments others placed on him. At school, Jamal was often the subject of quiet whispers. His classmates would talk about his intelligence, but it was never in a way that felt genuine. They were surprised when he aced a test or solved a difficult problem, but they would always attribute it to luck or an easy assignment. The truth was, Jamal's intelligence had always been his secret weapon, his one way to escape the expectations people had for him based on where he came from and the color of his skin. But instead of being celebrated for it, he found himself carrying the weight of others' disbelief. Jamal's best friend, Mike, was one of the few people who truly understood him. Mike had been his friend since elementary school, and over the years, their bond had only grown stronger. Mike was the one person who never doubted Jamal's abilities. In fact, Mike was the one who constantly reminded Jamal of what he was capable of, even when Jamal felt like the whole world was trying to make him feel small. "Man, you've got it all," Mike would say, his eyes lighting up with genuine pride. "You're smart, you've got a plan. You just gotta show them what you can do." But even Mike's encouragement couldn't always chase away the doubts that Jamal had about himself. The world had a way of making him feel invisible, and sometimes it was hard to shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, people would always see him as the kid from the wrong side of town, the kid who wasn't supposed to succeed. As he boarded the bus and found his seat by the window, Jamal pulled out his notebook and began to work on the math problem from earlier. The equation Mrs. Thompson had put on the board was difficult, but Jamal had an uncanny ability to think through complex problems. He wasn't sure how he did it, but his mind had a way of connecting dots that others couldn't see. In the quiet of the bus, as the city passed by in a blur, Jamal's mind raced. The problem on the board was hard, no doubt. But he knew it wasn't impossible. Mrs. Thompson's disbelief had stung, but in a way, it had only fueled his determination. This was his chance. Not just to prove her wrong, but to prove something to himself. Jamal knew that solving the problem wasn't just about the answer, it was about showing the world, and most importantly, himself, that he was more than the labels they placed on him. He was more than just the quiet kid. He was smart. He was capable. And, for once, he was going to show everyone just what he could do. As the bus pulled up to his stop, Jamal gathered his things and headed toward home. The weight of the problem still sat on his shoulders, but for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt a sense of resolve. This wasn't just another test. This was his moment. And he wasn't about to let it slip away. The next few days passed in a blur for Jamal. He spent his evenings revisiting the complex math problem that Mrs. Thompson had assigned, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle that needed to be solved. As always, his mind moved quickly, jumping from one possible solution to the next, but this time, something felt different. The challenge wasn't just academic, it had become personal. At school, the atmosphere in Mrs. Thompson's class was tense. As expected, most students had struggled with the equation, just as Mrs. Thompson had predicted. But Jamal wasn't like the others. While the rest of the class grumbled about the impossible nature of the problem, Jamal was quietly confident that he could solve it. It was a matter of pride now. Mrs. Thompson, however, seemed to be enjoying the struggle. She walked around the classroom, pausing every now and then to peer over students' shoulders, offering pointed comments designed to stoke their anxiety. "Don't get too comfortable with those answers, class," she said as she passed by, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You'll need more than basic math skills to crack this one." Jamal, sitting in his usual spot near the back of the room, stared at his paper. The numbers and symbols swirled on the page in front of him, but he wasn't fazed. His mind was focused, clearer than ever before. He had spent hours working on the equation, refining his approach, testing out different methods. He knew it was only a matter of time before he found the key. But there was something gnawing at him, something Mrs. Thompson had said that stuck with him. The quiet doubt she'd planted in his mind during their last exchange. The way she had dismissed him. The way she looked at him, as if he were just another student who would fail when faced with a real challenge. It wasn't just about the math anymore. Jamal felt the weight of her doubt pressing down on him, pushing him to prove her wrong, to show her, show everyone, that he was capable of more than they thought. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. Students began packing up their bags, but Jamal lingered, his eyes glued to the page in front of him. Mrs. Thompson moved toward her desk, seemingly satisfied that most of the students had given up. She caught sight of Jamal's focused expression and couldn't help but smile inwardly. He was still working on the problem, just like she knew he would. But she wasn't worried. She was confident he wouldn't be able to solve it. As the last of the students filed out of the room, Mrs. Thompson walked over to Jamal's desk. "Still working on it, huh?" she asked, her tone sharp and a little too smug. Jamal looked up, his eyes cool but determined. "I'll get it," he said quietly, but there was no hesitation in his voice. He didn't need to say more. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest. "I admire your persistence, Jamal, but you should know your limits. Not everyone is cut out for these kinds of problems. I hope you don't waste too much time on it." Jamal felt a flicker of irritation, but he held his ground. "I'm not wasting time," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm going to solve it." Mrs. Thompson paused, her lips curling into a tight smile. "We'll see about that," she said before turning to leave the room. "Don't stay too late. It's just a math problem." But Jamal didn't hear her anymore. He was already lost in thought, his mind once again racing through possible solutions. The more he thought about the equation, the more he realized it was more than just a test of his math skills. It was a test of something deeper, a test of his ability to rise above the doubts people like Mrs. Thompson had about him. By the time he left the classroom, the hallway was nearly empty. He quickly made his way to the bus stop, still thinking about the problem. As he boarded the bus and found his usual seat by the window, the events of the day replayed in his mind. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was happening inside him, something more than just solving an equation. Jamal had always been the quiet kid, the one who blended into the background. He had never sought attention, and he had always let others underestimate him. But now, for the first time, he felt a surge of determination, a fire that had been quietly smoldering inside him for years. This problem was his chance to show the world, his classmates, his teachers, even himself, that he was capable of more than anyone ever realized. The bus rumbled down the street, and Jamal's thoughts turned inward. He knew what he was capable of. But the more he thought about the equation, the more he realized something else. This problem wasn't just a test for him. It was a test for Mrs. Thompson, too. She thought she knew him, thought she knew his limits. But she was wrong. The next morning, Jamal sat down at his desk, determined to finish what he had started. His classmates had mostly given up on the problem by now. Their papers were filled with half-hearted attempts and frustrated scribbles, all discarded in defeat. But Jamal knew better than to give in so easily. Mrs. Thompson entered the room, her usual air of confidence surrounding her. She glanced over at Jamal's desk and saw that he was still at it, still working. "All right, class," she began, her voice filled with authority. "Today, we'll discuss the problem. I want to hear what you've come up with." Jamal didn't raise his hand. He wasn't interested in discussing the problem with his classmates, not yet. He was focused, determined. As Mrs. Thompson went around the room, asking students to share their progress, Jamal remained silent, his eyes fixed on the problem in front of him. Finally, Mrs. Thompson reached his desk. She looked at his paper, her expression unreadable. "Well, Jamal," she said, her voice laced with thinly veiled amusement. "It looks like you're still working. I hope you're not wasting your time." Jamal didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a deep breath and then slowly wrote down the final steps of his solution. When he finished, he handed the paper to Mrs. Thompson, his heart pounding in his chest. Mrs. Thompson looked down at the paper, her eyes narrowing. She glanced back up at Jamal, her face incredulous. This can't be right," she muttered under her breath, almost to herself. "How did you?" Jamal didn't say a word. He just sat there, watching her, waiting for the moment she would finally realize what he already knew, that he wasn't just another student. He was more. And for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The silence in the classroom was almost suffocating as Mrs. Thompson stared down at Jamal's paper. She blinked several times, her disbelief evident. The rest of the class, who had been idly chatting or waiting for the bell to ring, now noticed the tension hanging in the air. Some students glanced at each other, exchanging puzzled looks, while others leaned in closer, eager to witness what was unfolding. Jamal sat motionless at his desk, watching Mrs. Thompson with a quiet intensity. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a math problem anymore. It wasn't just about proving his intelligence or his worth to a teacher who had underestimated him. This was about taking that first step, an uncomfortable but necessary step, towards something bigger than he had ever imagined. After what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Thompson slowly exhaled, her lips barely parting in disbelief. This doesn't make any sense, she muttered, mostly to herself. Then, she looked up, locking eyes with Jamal. "Are you telling me, that you solved it?" she asked, her voice no longer the confident, mocking tone it had been earlier. There was a flicker of something else now, something that resembled uncertainty, maybe even a hint of respect. Jamal nodded silently. He didn't need to say anything. He had already said it all with the solution he had handed her. Mrs. Thompson's eyes flicked down to the paper again, her brow furrowing as she traced the steps of Jamal's solution. It was flawless. Every part of it made sense. There were no mistakes, no shortcuts, just a series of precise calculations that led to the correct answer. The answer no one else had managed to find. For a brief moment, Mrs. Thompson stood still, looking at the paper as if it were a foreign language she couldn't comprehend. Then, slowly, her gaze shifted back to Jamal, a reluctant admission of defeat in her expression. "How did you do this?" she asked, her voice quieter now, as if she were afraid of the answer. Jamal finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "I just focused. I took my time. I didn't let your doubts get in the way." A slight tension hung in the air as Mrs. Thompson processed his words. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. She glanced over at the rest of the class, who were all now watching the exchange with wide eyes. The room was still. No one dared to interrupt. Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat, straightening up as if to regain her composure. "All right then," she said, her tone no longer patronizing, but still tinged with skepticism. "Well, I suppose I'll have to reevaluate my expectations." She placed the paper on her desk and gave Jamal a brief, almost imperceptible nod before turning back to the class. Jamal, however, wasn't done. He wasn't going to let the moment slip by without saying what needed to be said. He stood up slowly, making sure his voice was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Ms. Thompson," Jamal said, his tone firm but respectful. "You've always doubted me. You've always assumed that because I don't fit your idea of what a smart student looks like, that I'm not capable. But I've been telling you all along that I can do this. I've been telling you that I'm not just a number, or a stereotype, or a kid who won't amount to anything. So maybe, just maybe, you should start listening to me and stop assuming what I can and can't do." The room fell dead silent. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Even Mrs. Thompson, who was usually so quick to dismiss Jamal's words, stood motionless. She didn't respond immediately, and the weight of her silence made Jamal's heart race. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Thompson spoke. "Jamal, I didn't mean to make you feel like that. I admit I may have underestimated you. But this changes things." She looked down at the paper again, her voice softer now. "You've earned my respect. And I'll make sure that doesn't go unnoticed." Jamal nodded, the fire inside him not fading but only growing stronger. "Thank you," he said, before sitting back down. He wasn't expecting a grand apology, and he certainly wasn't looking for anyone's validation. The only validation he needed was from himself. As Mrs. Thompson began to address the rest of the class, her tone more subdued than before, Jamal sat back in his seat, the familiar feeling of satisfaction washing over him. He had done it. He had proven himself, not only to Mrs. Thompson but also to everyone who had ever doubted him. But the victory was bittersweet. While Jamal had achieved a personal triumph, he knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be any easier. There were still so many people, his classmates, his teachers, and even his own family, who couldn't see the potential inside him. But that didn't matter. Jamal wasn't doing this for anyone else. He was doing it for himself. As the bell rang and students began filing out of the room, Jamal gathered his things slowly. He felt a sense of calm wash over him, but it was a calm born from resolve, not complacency. He had come this far, but the journey was far from over. On the way out of the classroom, Mike, his best friend, caught up with him. "Yo, man, I saw what happened. That was insane. You really showed Mrs. Thompson, huh?" Jamal smiled but didn't say anything. It wasn't about showing anyone. It was about something deeper, something personal. "Yeah," Jamal finally said, his voice low but steady. "I showed her. But most of all, I showed myself." Mike grinned, clapping him on the back. "You've always had it in you, bro. Just don't let anyone forget it." Jamal nodded, his mind already turning toward the next challenge. He knew that this moment, this victory, was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jamal was ready to take whatever came next. Because, for the first time in his life, he truly believed in himself. Jamal could feel the weight of the moment long after the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. He walked through the halls in a daze, his thoughts spinning, his heart still racing from the intensity of the exchange with Mrs. Thompson. It was a moment he had dreamed of, a moment where his intelligence and worth were finally recognized, where his silent years of struggle, of being overlooked, were suddenly validated. But even though the victory felt sweet in that moment, Jamal wasn't sure how to handle the aftermath. It wasn't just the look in Mrs. Thompson's eyes, or the murmurs of admiration from his classmates that lingered in the air, it was the realization that, for the first time in his life, he had stood up for himself. He had broken free from the shadows of doubt and fear, and it felt both liberating and terrifying. As he stepped out into the cool afternoon air, he couldn't shake the thought that things were changing. But change was never easy, and Jamal had learned that long ago. He didn't go straight home after school. Instead, he took a detour to the small cafe in the corner of his neighborhood, the one his mother used to take him to when he was little. He always went there when he needed to think, when his mind felt too cluttered. The quiet hum of the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of people chatting, it all had a calming effect on him. He slid into a booth by the window, pulling out the paper from his backpack. He stared at it for a long while, running his finger over the neat solution he had written down. The one that had changed everything. And yet, despite the significance of the moment, despite the pride he felt in his accomplishment, a lingering doubt still clung to him. What if this was just a fluke? Jamal whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the soft clinking of cups and plates around him. What if I don't actually belong here? What if I'm not good enough to keep up with this? He pressed his fingers to his forehead, feeling the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. The battle had been won, but the war wasn't over. He wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. For so long, he had been the kid who didn't quite belong, the one who kept his head down, who hid his true potential behind a mask of indifference. But now, the mask was off. The world could see him for who he was. But did he even know who that was? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a familiar voice. Jamal. He looked up to see his older sister, Erica, standing at the entrance of the cafe, a concerned expression on her face. She was always looking out for him, even when he didn't ask for it. Erica, he said, giving her a small, tired smile. What are you doing here? Erica slid into the seat across from him, her eyes searching his face as she noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on you. How's school? How's the math stuff? Jamal sighed and leaned back against the booth, running a hand through his hair. I did it. I solved the problem. Erica's eyes lit up with genuine pride. No way. Seriously? That's amazing, Jamal. He nodded, but there was a tinge of uncertainty in his voice. Yeah, but I don't know. It feels different now. I don't really know where I stand anymore. I mean, Mrs. Thompson, she respects me now, but that doesn't change everything, right? It's not like things are just magically better. Erica listened quietly, her eyes softening as she reached across the table to take his hand. You're right, she said quietly. It's not going to change everything overnight. But it's a start, Jamal. You're starting to see yourself the way I've always seen you. You're capable of so much more than you think. Jamal looked at her, his eyes full of a mix of confusion and longing. I don't know how to keep going, he admitted. It's like I've opened a door, but now I'm not sure what's on the other side. Erica smiled gently. You don't have to have all the answers, Jamal. You just need to take the next step. Don't let this one moment define everything. There's a long road ahead, and you're going to have to keep proving yourself, both to others and to yourself. But you've got this. You've always had it in you. Jamal nodded, though the doubt still lingered in his mind. But what if I can't do it? What if I can't keep up with this new expectation people have of me? His sister's expression softened, and she squeezed his hand gently. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward. You've already shown them who you are. You just need to believe in it yourself. For the first time in a long while, Jamal allowed himself to breathe a little easier. Erica's words, simple and encouraging, settled in his chest like a small weight lifted. He didn't have to have everything figured out right now. He didn't have to be the perfect student or the perfect son. All he had to do was keep moving forward, keep believing in himself, and take the next step. Jamal looked down at his paper once more. It was just a piece of paper, a series of numbers and symbols. But in that moment, it felt like a symbol of something much bigger. It wasn't just about solving an impossible math problem anymore, it was about proving to himself that he was capable of achieving anything he set his mind to. And as he left the cafe with Erica by his side, Jamal realized that his journey was only just beginning. The next few days felt like a blur for Jamal. The victory in Mrs. Thompson's class, the shift in the way his classmates looked at him, everything was moving faster than he was prepared for. He couldn't escape the feeling that, while he had made progress, there was still so much more to prove. Mrs. Thompson may have acknowledged his brilliance, but that didn't mean his struggles were over. Every time he walked into the classroom now, he could feel the eyes on him, curiosity, admiration, and, if he was being honest with himself, a little bit of envy. It was as though the expectations had been raised, not just by Mrs. Thompson, but by everyone around him. The pressure was mounting, and Jamal wasn't sure how to handle it. Even though his classmates were starting to talk to him more, ask for help with their homework, and sit beside him in class, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. It was a strange paradox, he was the center of attention, but he still felt as if he were standing on the outside looking in. In the lunchroom, things had changed. Where once he had sat alone or with a small group of friends, now people seemed to gravitate toward him. Mike, his best friend, had been his rock through it all, but now even Mike was acting differently. There was a certain awe in his voice when he spoke to Jamal, a sense of reverence that Jamal didn't know how to handle. Yo, man, you see how Mrs. Thompson looked at you the other day? Mike asked one afternoon as they sat across from each other at lunch. She actually respected you. That's huge. Jamal nodded but didn't feel the excitement Mike seemed to have. Yeah, I guess. But it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like everyone's expecting something from me now. Like I have to live up to something I'm not sure I can. Mike shrugged. I get that, man. But you've always been smart. You've always had the answers, even when people didn't see it. Now they're just starting to catch up. Jamal wasn't so sure. It wasn't just about the math problem anymore. It wasn't even about being right for once. What bothered him was how quickly everything had changed. The pressure to continue proving himself. Was it even possible to meet everyone's new expectations? Later that afternoon, Jamal was walking home when he was stopped by his older brother, DeAndre, who had just gotten out of his car. DeAndre had always been someone Jamal looked up to, but these days, Jamal wasn't sure how to feel about him. DeAndre, with his easy confidence and laid-back swagger, never seemed to be concerned about anything. "You look deep in thought," DeAndre said, leaning against the car. "What's going on?" Jamal hesitated. How could he explain the turmoil in his mind? The constant pressure to live up to a standard that he wasn't sure he could meet? "I don't know, man," Jamal finally said. "I'm just trying to figure out what happens next. It feels like I've crossed some line and now everyone wants something from me. Mrs. Thompson, the class, even you. You're all acting like I've become something different. Like I'm supposed to be some kind of genius now or something." DeAndre studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I get it," he said slowly. "You're scared. Scared of failing, scared of being too much, or not enough. But listen to me, Jamal. What you did with that math problem. It's just the beginning. It's not the end." Jamal looked up at him, frustration bubbling up. "What do you mean? I can't keep this up. People are expecting me to be perfect now." DeAndre grinned, his usual self-assurance shining through. "Perfection? Nah. That's a myth. What you're feeling. It's normal. People expect a lot of things from you because they see what you can do. But it's up to you whether you want to meet those expectations. You can keep trying to live up to other people's idea of who you are, or you can create your own path. It's on you, little bro." Jamal didn't respond right away. His brother's words had struck a chord, but Jamal wasn't sure if he was ready to embrace that kind of freedom. Could he really stop worrying about what others thought of him? Could he keep pushing forward without being weighed down by everyone's expectations? "I'm just tired of being the smart kid or the problem solver," Jamal muttered. "It feels like people don't even see me for who I really am. They just see the grade on the paper, the solution to the problem. That's all they care about." DeAndre took a step closer, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You're more than that, Jamal. A lot more. You just have to see it for yourself. I can't tell you who you are or what you're meant to do. That's on you. But don't let the pressure change you. You get to decide who you are." Jamal looked up at his brother, the words sinking in slowly. DeAndre wasn't offering any easy answers. He wasn't going to tell him what to do. But maybe, just maybe, he was giving him permission to figure it out on his own. As Jamal walked the rest of the way home, his thoughts were swirling. He couldn't deny that the pressure was getting to him. But there was something else bubbling beneath the surface, something that felt like hope, even if it was faint. The road ahead was uncertain, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was okay to not have everything figured out. Maybe it was okay to be unsure, to feel the weight of others' expectations without letting them crush him. As he reached his front door, Jamal took a deep breath, resolving to keep going, even if he didn't know where the journey would lead. He wasn't just proving something to Mrs. Thompson, or to anyone else. He was proving something to himself. And no matter how hard it got, he wouldn't back down. Jamal woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a while. The weight of expectation still lingered in his mind, but something about his conversation with DeAndre had sparked a shift in him. He no longer felt like a prisoner of other people's views of him. For the first time, he was ready to embrace the challenge of being himself, flawed, uncertain, but determined. But even with that newfound resolve, Jamal quickly realized that the world wasn't going to suddenly make things easier for him. His first period that day was calculus, and Mrs. Thompson had given the class a new assignment. It was a complex series of problems that, while not as difficult as the last one he had solved, still posed a significant challenge. As the bell rang and students shuffled into the classroom, Jamal took his usual seat near the back of the room. He could already feel the eyes of his classmates on him, though he tried to ignore them. They were no longer just his peers, they were his audience, waiting for him to perform. And the pressure to get everything right, to continue being the genius who had solved the impossible problem, weighed heavily on him. Mrs. Thompson began explaining the assignment, but Jamal's mind wandered. He couldn't help but think of the day before, when he had been on such a high after solving the problem. That was before all the expectations came rushing in. What if he failed today? What if he couldn't live up to the newfound respect everyone seemed to have for him? He glanced at the clock. Only 20 minutes had passed since the class started, but it felt like an eternity. Jamal reached for his pencil and began working through the problems. They were tough, no doubt about it, but they were manageable. Still, his mind kept drifting to the uncertainty he felt. The weight of the expectations was suffocating. Halfway through the assignment, Mrs. Thompson called on him. "Jamal, would you mind walking us through the solution to number 5? You've got such a strong grasp on these problems." Jamal froze. He could feel the sweat beginning to form on his palms. The room seemed to close in on him, and for a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding in his chest. Mrs. Thompson was right, he did know the answer. He'd already worked it out in his head, but this wasn't just about solving the problem. It was about proving to everyone that he was still the same Jamal who had solved that impossible math problem. What if he messed up? Taking a deep breath, he slowly stood up, feeling the eyes of his classmates follow him as he made his way to the whiteboard. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the marker. "Okay," he said, trying to sound confident, though his voice betrayed him, sounding more nervous than he wanted. "So, for number 5, we start with the derivative of the equation." He moved through the solution, step by step, but with every move, he could feel the tension rising in his chest. Each stroke of the marker felt like an eternity, and the longer he took, the more he could sense the anticipation in the room. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at the class. No one spoke for a moment, the room hanging in silence. Then, Mrs. Thompson nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "Well done, Jamal. You made that look easy." The class erupted into applause, and Jamal forced himself to smile, but it didn't feel genuine. He had solved the problem, yes, but the feeling of relief was fleeting. As the applause died down, Jamal sat back down at his desk, trying to regain his composure. He felt hollow inside. The praise from Mrs. Thompson, the admiration of his classmates, it all felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. He didn't know if it was the pressure or the fear of failure that made it hard to accept the compliments. But deep down, Jamal knew there was something else at play. He wasn't just afraid of failing in front of his peers. He was afraid of succeeding, too. Because success meant that people would always expect him to be perfect. And Jamal wasn't perfect. He was just a teenager trying to figure it all out. As the bell rang and students filtered out of the classroom, Jamal remained seated, his head resting on his hand, staring at the assignment in front of him. Mrs. Thompson had noticed his hesitation, but she didn't say anything. She had already given him the benefit of the doubt. Jamal knew she had faith in him, but now, more than ever, he was unsure of his own abilities. Could he keep up with the new expectations? Could he live up to the image that others had created for him? Later that day, as Jamal sat in the school courtyard, trying to escape the chaotic rush of students, Mike found him and dropped down beside him on the bench. "You good?" Mike asked, noticing the furrowed brow and the distant look in Jamal's eyes. Jamal shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I'm just tired of it all. Every day feels like I'm walking a tightrope, trying not to fall. And it's exhausting, Mike." Mike nodded, not bothering to offer a bunch of empty words of reassurance. He just understood. "You're doing all right, man. I see how much you've been carrying on your shoulders. But it's okay to feel tired. You don't have to be perfect every day. Just take it one step at a time." Jamal looked over at Mike, his best friend's face a familiar comfort in the midst of all the chaos. Mike didn't expect him to be some genius, and he wasn't looking for the answers to life. He was just there, offering support when Jamal needed it most. "I just want to get through it, Mike," Jamal admitted quietly. "I want to figure this out, but sometimes, it feels like I'm not even sure what I'm doing anymore." Mike clapped him on the back. "You don't have to know everything right now, bro. You've been doing fine up until now, and you'll keep doing fine. Just don't let it break you, okay?" Jamal nodded, the weight of Mike's words sinking in. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe a little easier. It wasn't about having it all figured out. It was about showing up, day after day, and doing the best he could, even when it felt impossible. As he walked back to his next class, Jamal wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that it was okay to be unsure, to struggle, and to take things one step at a time. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to keep going. Jamal's life had taken an unexpected turn in the past few weeks, and despite the support of Mike and DeAndre, the pressure continued to build. The more he tried to balance the expectations placed on him, the more he felt the weight of being different. Being different wasn't always a bad thing, but when the world around you made it feel like a burden, it was hard to carry. It was another Wednesday afternoon when Mrs. Thompson announced the next big project, a group assignment that would require a deep dive into a challenging topic, calculus and physics combined. She was careful to pair everyone strategically, making sure each group had a mix of strengths and skills. Jamal had learned to expect this, as Mrs. Thompson often challenged her students to push beyond their comfort zones. When she called out the groupings, Jamal's heart sank. He was paired with Evan, a quiet but studious kid who had always kept to himself. Then there was Erica, a former cheerleader who had recently joined the class and was known for being more focused on socializing than academics. Finally, there was Maya, a girl with a sharp wit who often spoke her mind, but who wasn't particularly strong in math. Jamal's initial instinct was to groan. Why was he always the one expected to carry the group? His reputation as the math genius had led to everyone assuming he was the one who could fix all the problems. It was frustrating. He had his own struggles, his own doubts, but none of that seemed to matter to anyone else. The moment the group assignments were handed out, the rest of his group members shot him looks of relief, silently communicating that they expected him to take the lead. As the bell rang and everyone shuffled out of class, Jamal's thoughts swirled. It was already clear that he was going to have to do most of the work. He wasn't sure how he felt about this. On one hand, he enjoyed the feeling of being needed and respected, but on the other hand, it was exhausting. Was this what it was going to be like from now on? Being the go-to problem solver, the one who had to always show up and have all the answers. Later that day, Jamal met up with his group at the library, the assigned meeting spot. He arrived early, hoping to get a head start on the research, but as soon as Maya, Erica, and Evan walked in, he knew the evening was going to be a long one. Maya was already scrolling through her phone, Erica was chatting with her friends, and Evan was silently sitting at the table, his eyes avoiding Jamal's gaze. "All right, let's get started," Jamal said, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "We need to break down the project into parts. I think we should focus on the calculus side first and figure out how the physics equations tie in." Maya raised an eyebrow and glanced up from her phone. Yeah. Sure. But, what exactly are we supposed to do with all this? I don't even get what half of this stuff means." Jamal's teeth clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's why we're here to figure it out. You're going to need to read through the materials and help with the research, Maya." She sighed but nodded, looking down at her phone again, clearly disinterested. Erica finally spoke up, though her tone was less than enthusiastic. I mean, if Jamal's doing the math stuff, I guess I'll handle the presentation side. You know, make it look pretty. Jamal took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time he'd been put in this position. He had dealt with group projects before, but this felt different. The weight of the group's expectations, the assumption that he would carry the entire workload, gnawed at him. It was hard enough dealing with the pressure in class. Now, he was expected to manage his entire group's success. I think we need to break this down further, Jamal said, his voice more assertive. Everyone has to contribute. It's not just about me solving the problems. We need to be a team. Erica shot him a look, then rolled her eyes. Sure. I'll help with the parts one can. But let's be real, Jamal. You're the one who gets this stuff. Jamal felt his patience thinning. It was hard to ignore the truth in her words, he was the one who got it. But that didn't mean he had to do it alone. I'm not the only one who can help here, he said, his voice tight. We all need to contribute. There was a long pause before Evan spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll help with the math part. I can understand it if you explain it. I'm just not great at presenting, you know. Jamal nodded, relieved to have at least one other person who seemed willing to put in the effort. Okay, good. Let's start with breaking down the first section and assigning some smaller tasks. We all need to stay focused and get this done, or we'll be in trouble. The group grudgingly agreed, and they spent the next couple of hours sorting through the project, each person taking on one piece of the puzzle. Jamal tried his best to guide the group, explaining the complex calculus equations in simpler terms, while Maya and Erica focused on gathering background information. Evan, for the most part, stuck to the math problems, occasionally asking Jamal to clarify certain steps. It wasn't ideal, but it was progress. As they wrapped up the session, Jamal was exhausted. He had spent most of the evening doing the heavy lifting, breaking down complicated problems for his group, explaining things multiple times, and trying to keep everyone on track. As they packed up to leave, Maya smiled at him, though it didn't feel entirely sincere. Thanks for doing all the work, Jamal. You really saved us. Jamal didn't know how to respond. Was she being sarcastic? Was she truly grateful? He didn't have the energy to figure it out. He simply nodded, gathered his things, and walked out of the library, his mind once again consumed by the realization that, no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't escape the expectations. Back at home, Jamal sank into his chair, feeling the familiar weight of the world pressing down on him. He wasn't just solving math problems anymore. He was trying to hold everything together, his classmates' expectations, the pressure to succeed, and the fear of failure. Every day felt like a balancing act, and Jamal wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mike. How'd the group project go? Jamal typed a quick reply, same old. I did all the work. I think everyone expects me to be perfect, but it's exhausting. Mike's response came almost immediately, you don't have to be perfect, man. You're doing your best. Just don't let them push you around. Jamal stared at the message, trying to let the words sink in. Maybe Mike was right. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. It was about doing his best and learning how to manage the pressure. But it wasn't easy. With a heavy sigh, Jamal put his phone down and lay back in his chair. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge. And somehow, he was going to have to face it, one step at a time. The next few days felt like a blur to Jamal. School was a constant cycle of solving equations, managing group projects, and dealing with the never-ending pressure of being the genius student. Each day, he tried to push through, but the cracks in his calm facade were starting to show. It wasn't just the academic pressure, it was everything else, too. Jamal could feel the eyes of his classmates on him more than ever. Some of them admired him, others envied him, and a few even resented him. Every time he walked through the halls, he could feel the whispers follow him. "That's the guy who solved that impossible problem," they'd say. "I bet he's got all the answers." But what they didn't see was the inner turmoil he was dealing with. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, Jamal was drained. He had just finished his last class for the week, and all he wanted was to go home, shut everything out, and just breathe for a few hours. But there was no escaping it. He was expected to show up, be the perfect student, and carry the weight of everyone's expectations. As he walked out of the classroom, Jamal was stopped by Mrs. Thompson. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "Jamal, I wanted to talk to you about the project. I've been impressed with your work recently. You're really putting in the effort, but I've noticed that you've been carrying a lot of the load. How are you feeling?" Jamal forced a smile. He knew Mrs. Thompson meant well, but hearing those words made him feel more overwhelmed than ever. "I'm fine, Mrs. Thompson. Just trying to keep up." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her expression softening. "I understand that you're doing your best, but I also want you to remember that it's okay to lean on your classmates. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Jamal swallowed hard. He appreciated her concern, but it felt like she was only seeing a fraction of the picture. "I'll be fine. Thanks for checking in." She nodded, but Jamal could see the concern still lingering in her eyes as he walked away. He felt trapped. Every time someone praised him or asked him to do more, it was like another brick was added to the pile of pressure on his shoulders. By the time he reached his car, he could barely summon the energy to turn the key in the ignition. At home, Jamal collapsed onto his bed, staring up at the ceiling. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to pretend anymore. He was tired of being the guy who had all the answers, the one everyone came to for help. The truth was, he didn't have it all figured out. He didn't even know who he was anymore, outside of his role as the math genius. His phone buzzed, breaking him from his thoughts. It was a text from DeAndre. "DeAndre, yo, man. You good? I've been hearing some things." Jamal sighed and typed a quick response, "I don't know anymore. It's getting to be too much. I feel like I'm losing myself trying to keep up with everyone else's expectations." A few minutes passed before DeAndre replied. "DeAndre, I hear you, bro. It's hard. But don't let this thing break you. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. We all see what you're doing, but you're still just Jamal. You don't have to be perfect. Take some time for yourself." Jamal read DeAndre's words over and over, feeling the weight of them settle into his chest. It was a relief to hear someone acknowledge how hard it was, someone who understood that there was more to him than just his academic abilities. Still, even DeAndre's words couldn't shake the feeling of suffocation that Jamal felt. He was stuck in a cycle of perfection, and every time he tried to break free, the world seemed to pull him right back in. The next day, Jamal found himself standing in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He was still the same person he had always been, only now, it felt like he was playing a role. A role that everyone expected him to fulfill. The smart student. The math genius. The guy who could solve any problem. But who was Jamal, really? That question had been eating at him for weeks, and he didn't have an answer. It wasn't just about the math anymore. It wasn't about solving problems or showing off his intelligence. It was about identity. Who was he beyond the accolades and expectations? Jamal thought about the conversations he'd had with Mike and DeAndre. Both of them had reminded him that he didn't have to be perfect. But how could he let go of the pressure? How could he let himself fail, even in small ways, without feeling like it would all come crashing down? By the time Monday rolled around, Jamal had decided he couldn't keep pretending. He couldn't keep carrying everyone else's expectations on his shoulders, not when it was costing him his peace of mind. When he entered Mrs. Thompson's class, Jamal made up his mind to finally speak up. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. He had to say something about the burden he was carrying, the expectations that no one seemed to see but him. As the bell rang and the students settled into their seats, Jamal raised his hand. Mrs. Thompson paused in her lecture and looked at him curiously. "Yes, Jamal?" she asked. "I need to talk to you after class," Jamal said, his voice steadier than he felt. I think I need to take a step back." Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow, but she didn't push him. "Of course. We'll talk after class." As the rest of the period unfolded, Jamal tried to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept returning to his decision. He had to say what he was feeling. He couldn't keep this up. After the bell rang, Jamal stayed behind, waiting for the room to clear out. Mrs. Thompson approached him with a concerned expression. "What's going on, Jamal?" she asked. "Is everything all right?" Jamal hesitated, but then he took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. The projects, the expectations, it's all just too much. I feel like everyone is looking at me to have all the answers, but I'm just one person. I'm not perfect. I can't be perfect." Mrs. Thompson looked at him with soft eyes. "Jamal, you don't have to be perfect. No one expects that from you. I know you've been carrying a lot, and I want you to know that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not have all the answers." Jamal nodded, though his chest still felt tight. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe a little easier. "I just don't know how to stop being that person everyone expects me to be." "You don't have to stop being who you are," Mrs. Thompson replied gently. "But you do need to take care of yourself. You don't have to be the one who solves everything. You are allowed to take a break." Jamal let the words sink in. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was alone in this. The following week felt different for Jamal. For the first time in months, he didn't wake up with that heavy weight pressing on his chest. Mrs. Thompson's words had stuck with him. You don't have to be perfect. It's okay to take a break. The more he thought about them, the more he realized she was right. Maybe he didn't have to solve everyone's problems, be the go-to guy for every class project, or shoulder the weight of his classmates' expectations. But how could he stop? Could he really just walk away from everything? It was Wednesday when he had another conversation with DeAndre that really opened his eyes. After gym class, while they were sitting outside, Jamal couldn't hold it in any longer. He had been trying to suppress his feelings, but he felt like he was about to burst. "Man, I don't know if I can keep this up," Jamal said, rubbing his forehead. "I feel like I'm drowning. Everyone just assumes I can do it all, and it's too much. I don't even know who I am anymore, beyond math, beyond solving problems." DeAndre nodded thoughtfully, his usual carefree attitude softened. "I hear you, bro. But maybe that's the thing. You've been so focused on doing everything for everyone else that you've forgotten about you. You're not just the smart kid who solves problems. You're Jamal, a person who deserves to take a breath, too." Jamal let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. I don't know what that even looks like. What does it mean to not be the guy with all the answers?" DeAndre shrugged. "Maybe it means learning to say no. Maybe it means letting go of the idea that you have to fix everything. Just, be yourself. It's okay to need a little help, too. It's okay to ask for a break." Jamal stared at him for a moment, feeling the weight of those words settle in. He had always been the one people relied on, the one who had the answers. But the truth was, he didn't always have them. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to have them all the time. Later that day, Jamal found himself thinking about how he could start making changes. The first thing that came to mind was his group project. He had been doing most of the work, trying to balance out the group's lack of effort. But the truth was, he had been too afraid to speak up, afraid that if he didn't do it all, everything would fall apart. It was time to try something different. That evening, he sat down with his project group at the library again. This time, he was determined to approach it differently. As they gathered around the table, Jamal cleared his throat, a new sense of resolve in his voice. "Okay, guys. We need to talk." Maya, Erica, and Evan looked up, clearly surprised by the serious tone in his voice. Jamal continued, feeling the butterflies in his stomach, but he pushed through. "I've been doing a lot of the work on this project, and it's not fair to me. I can't keep carrying everything. I need you all to step up and contribute. We're a team, and we all need to put in the effort." There was a moment of silence. Maya looked a little taken aback, but she quickly nodded. "You're right, Jamal. We haven't been pulling our weight. I'll help more with the research." Evan chimed in, his voice quieter than usual. "I'll take on more of the math side. I know I've been slacking." Erica, who had been quiet so far, finally spoke. "I'll work on the presentation. I can do more, I promise." Jamal felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was the change he needed. It wasn't about doing everything himself, it was about trusting his group and allowing them to contribute. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was the beginning of something different. For the rest of the session, the group worked together more harmoniously. Maya actually read through the materials and found key points to add to the project, while Evan helped with breaking down some of the harder math problems. Even Erica took it upon herself to organize their findings into a coherent structure. Jamal contributed, of course, but for once, he didn't feel like he was carrying the entire project on his back. When the session ended, Jamal walked out of the library feeling a sense of relief he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The group had actually worked together, and for the first time in a while, Jamal felt like he had made space for himself, both in the project and in his own life. The next day, during lunch, Jamal met up with Mike. They talked about the progress on the project, but the conversation soon shifted to a more personal topic. "You look different," Mike remarked, glancing at Jamal as they ate. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter, maybe. Like something's changed." Jamal smiled, the first real smile he'd had in days. "I think I'm finally starting to let go of the idea that I have to do everything. I'm starting to say no to things that are too much. I'm not going to let everyone's expectations control me anymore." Mike nodded, clearly proud of his friend. "Man, that's a huge step. And honestly, I think you're going to feel a lot better. You don't have to be the guy who fixes everything all the time." Jamal paused, looking at Mike for a moment. It was like a weight had been lifted off his chest. "Yeah. I'm starting to realize that I don't have to fix everything. I can just be me." That night, Jamal went to bed with a clearer mind. He had a long way to go, but he was starting to find his way back to himself. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and the expectations would still be there, but now he knew he didn't have to carry them all alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following week, Jamal's sense of relief from sharing the burden of his schoolwork carried over into other parts of his life. Slowly, he found himself embracing the power of vulnerability, something he'd never truly allowed himself to do. It wasn't easy. Vulnerability had always seemed like a weakness, something to avoid in order to keep up the image of the perfect, smart student. But now, with the weight lifted from his shoulders, he realized that there was strength in being honest about his limitations, about not always having it all together. One Wednesday afternoon, Jamal was walking to his locker when he overheard a conversation between a couple of his classmates, Luke and Clara. They were talking about the upcoming math competition, and as usual, the talk centered on Jamal's involvement. "Man, Jamal is going to crush this competition." "No doubt about it," Luke said, his voice tinged with admiration. Clara agreed, adding, "Yeah, he's like a walking calculator. If he's in, it's pretty much over for everyone else." Jamal's heart sank as he overheard their words. It was the same old narrative: Jamal, the math genius, the guy who solved the impossible problems. He didn't want to be that guy anymore. Not because he didn't love math, but because he didn't want his identity to be defined solely by his academic achievements. As he stood by his locker, the feeling of isolation began to creep back in. No matter how hard he tried to shift the expectations placed on him, they were still there, hovering in the background, ready to pounce at the next opportunity. Jamal wanted to show people that he was more than just the kid who could solve equations. He was a person, with hopes, dreams, flaws, and fears. But how could he break free from this image that had been built up around him? That afternoon, Jamal made a decision. He wasn't going to participate in the competition. He would step back and let someone else take the lead for once. But he also realized that he needed to explain this decision to Mrs. Thompson, who had been so supportive of him. After school, he found Mrs. Thompson in her classroom, grading papers. The room smelled faintly of coffee, and there was a quiet hum in the air as she worked. Jamal hesitated for a moment before walking in, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked up from her papers, a smile crossing her face. "Jamal. What's on your mind?" "I need to talk to you about the competition," Jamal began, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "I've decided I'm not going to participate this year." Mrs. Thompson's brow furrowed, clearly surprised. "Oh. Why not?" Jamal took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been going on lately, about how I've been handling school and my relationships with others. And I've realized that I've been so focused on living up to other people's expectations that I've lost sight of who I am. I need to take a step back, focus on what's really important to me, and stop trying to prove something to everyone else." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Jamal thought Mrs. Thompson might be disappointed. But when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle and understanding. "I think you're making a wise decision, Jamal. It's important to take care of yourself. You don't have to constantly prove your worth to others. You've already shown us your brilliance, and you have nothing left to prove." Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly being seen, not as the math genius, but as Jamal, the person with his own struggles and needs. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson," Jamal said quietly. "That means a lot." Later that evening, Jamal sat down with his family at the dinner table. They talked about school, his upcoming plans for the summer, and the usual family chatter. But Jamal felt lighter, as if the conversation was finally free from the burden of expectations. He wasn't the perfect student or the perfect son, he was just himself, and that was enough. As they ate, his mother looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Jamal, I've noticed you've been a little more relaxed lately. You seem happy." Jamal smiled, feeling the warmth of her words. "Yeah, I guess I am. I think I'm finally starting to figure things out. I've realized that it's okay to not have all the answers and that it's okay to ask for help. I don't have to be perfect all the time." His mother reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "You've always been more than just your grades, baby. We're proud of you no matter what. Just remember to take care of yourself." Those words, spoken so simply, meant more to Jamal than he could explain. It was a reminder that he didn't have to be perfect to be loved. He didn't have to live up to some ideal to be valuable. He was enough just as he was. The next day, as he walked through the halls of the school, Jamal felt a newfound sense of freedom. His shoulders no longer carried the heavy burden of other people's expectations. He wasn't trying to fit into the mold they had created for him, he was stepping out of it, ready to define himself on his own terms. When he bumped into Maya by the lockers, she greeted him with a wide smile. "Hey, Jamal. How's everything going? I heard you're not doing the competition this year." Jamal nodded, feeling lighter than ever. "Yeah. I decided I need to focus on other things, on taking care of myself. It's time to stop trying to live up to everyone else's idea of who I should be." Maya smiled knowingly. Good for you. You deserve to do what makes you happy, not just what others expect. And hey, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Jamal smiled back, feeling a warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally being true to himself, no longer trapped in a role that others had written for him. He wasn't just the smart kid, he was Jamal, and that was more than enough. As the school day continued, Jamal found himself talking to people more freely, feeling less self-conscious. His conversations with classmates were less about proving his worth and more about real connections. He was starting to understand that it wasn't about the accolades or the competitions, it was about the journey of self-discovery, the ability to be open and vulnerable, and the willingness to let go of the need for perfection. By the end of the week, Jamal realized that his journey was only just beginning. It wasn't about solving problems or being the best, it was about understanding who he was and what he wanted from life. And for the first time, Jamal felt like he was on the right path. The following weeks felt like a slow, steady transformation for Jamal. He was learning to navigate his life with less pressure, less focus on being the best at everything, and more attention to his own needs. However, one thing still lingered in the back of his mind, his past. For years, he had been running from it. His relationship with his father had always been strained, and it had only worsened when his father moved away for work. It wasn't just that his dad had left, it was the silent treatment, the unspoken words, and the distance between them that seemed to grow by the day. Jamal had tried to bury his feelings, telling himself that it didn't matter, that he didn't need his father to be successful. But deep down, he knew that the unresolved tension was something he couldn't ignore forever. It was a Saturday afternoon when Jamal finally decided that it was time to confront it. He had been avoiding it for so long, but something about the way his life had been shifting, about the peace he had begun to find, made him realize that it wasn't just about the school or the future. It was about understanding who he was and where he came from. Jamal sat on the couch, his fingers nervously tapping the phone in his hand. He stared at his father's number in his contacts. It had been months since they last spoke, and Jamal wasn't sure what to expect. He hesitated for a moment, but then, as if guided by an instinct he hadn't felt in a long time, he pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered. Jamal. His father's voice was a mix of surprise and caution. It was clear that he hadn't expected this call. What's going on? Jamal swallowed hard. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end. Talk. About what? About us, Jamal said, his voice steady but with a hint of emotion that he couldn't fully suppress. About everything. About you leaving. About the way things are between us. I can't keep ignoring it anymore. His father sighed deeply, a sound of weariness in his voice. Jamal, I know things haven't been great. But you know how hard it's been. I thought I was doing what was best for us. Jamal's heart clenched. Best for us? By leaving? By not even being there for me when I needed you? Do you even know what it was like growing up with you always gone? Do you understand how that made me feel? There was another long pause. Jamal could almost feel the distance between them as the silence stretched on. Then his father spoke again, but this time his voice was softer, less defensive. I know, Jamal. I know I wasn't there the way I should have been. And I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes. But I'm here now, and I want to try to make things right. I want to be a part of your life. Jamal's mind raced as he processed the words. He had spent so many years building walls around his heart, telling himself that he didn't need his father, that he was fine on his own. But in this moment, Jamal realized that he wasn't fine. He had been hurt, and it had affected every part of his life. I don't know if I can just forgive you like that, Jamal said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. But I want to try. I want to know you. I want to have a real relationship with you. Not just the guy who shows up once in a while, but, you know, a real dad. I just don't know where to start. On the other end, there was a sound of relief, as if Jamal's words had pierced through the years of tension. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, son. I've missed you. And I know I've let you down, but I want to make it right. Let's start over. We don't have to fix everything at once, but I want to be there for you. For real this time. Jamal felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't a magic fix, and he knew it would take time, but this was the first step. This conversation was a beginning, not an end. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to move forward, together. Okay, Jamal said, his voice calmer now. Let's start over. But it's going to take time. I understand, his father replied. And I'll be patient. We'll take it one step at a time. After ending the call, Jamal sat back on the couch, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. It wasn't easy to confront the past, especially when it involved someone he loved but had been hurt by. But now that the conversation was out in the open, Jamal knew that he could start healing, not just for himself, but for his relationship with his father. The next day, Jamal met with Mike and DeAndre after school. They noticed immediately that something had shifted in him. Yo, you good? Mike asked, his tone concerned but supportive. Jamal nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Just, had a conversation with my dad. DeAndre raised an eyebrow. Your dad? I thought you guys weren't talking anymore. We weren't, Jamal said, taking a deep breath. But I called him yesterday. We talked about everything. It wasn't easy, but I think it's a start. Mike and DeAndre exchanged looks, and then Mike clapped Jamal on the back. Man, that's huge. I'm proud of you. Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of warmth at their support. Thanks. It's gonna take time, but I think it's worth it. I want to have a real relationship with him, you know. Not just the one where he's a stranger in my life. DeAndre grinned. That's the way to do it. You've got this, Jamal. It's a process, but you're making the right moves. Jamal's chest swelled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was taking control of his life, confronting the past instead of running from it. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As he walked through the halls, the weight of the world didn't feel as heavy. For the first time in years, Jamal felt a sense of possibility. His future wasn't defined by expectations or old wounds, it was defined by the person he was choosing to become. And in that moment, Jamal knew that no matter what happened, he was going to be okay. As Jamal continued to heal and grow, he found himself leaning more into the new relationships that had begun to blossom around him. One of the most surprising shifts came in the form of someone he hadn't expected to connect with, Mr. Harris, the new physics teacher. Mr. Harris was different from the other teachers Jamal had encountered. He wasn't the typical no-nonsense educator, and he didn't care about the labels other people placed on students. From the very first day of class, he had a way of making Jamal feel seen for who he was beyond just his academic potential. Jamal didn't understand it at first, but it quickly became clear that Mr. Harris had a knack for recognizing the potential in his students, even when they couldn't see it themselves. It started when Jamal stayed after class one afternoon to talk to Mr. Harris about the upcoming exam. While the other students left, Mr. Harris stayed behind, organizing his desk and scribbling on a pad of paper. Jamal hesitated before speaking up. Mr. Harris, he began, unsure of how to start, I just wanted to make sure I'm studying the right things for the test. I really don't want to mess this up. Mr. Harris looked up, his calm blue eyes meeting Jamal's. Jamal, you're not the kind of student who messes things up. You're someone who puts in the work. That's what matters most. Jamal blinked in surprise. But I don't always get everything on the first try. Sometimes, I feel like I'm just scraping by. Mr. Harris chuckled, setting his pen down. You're not alone in that. Everyone struggles with something. Even I did, back in the day. But it's not about always getting things perfect. It's about learning from your mistakes and pushing through. I can see that you have the drive, Jamal. You just have to trust that you're capable. The simplicity of Mr. Harris's words struck Jamal harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how much he'd been holding himself back from truly believing in his own abilities. It was like a veil had been lifted, and for the first time, Jamal saw himself not as the person he thought others expected him to be, but as someone who was learning, growing, and willing to fail, just as everyone else did. "Thanks, Mr. Harris," Jamal said, his voice more confident than before. "I appreciate that." "No problem, Jamal," Mr. Harris replied, his tone warm. "Just remember, don't rush the process. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the failures, not the successes." That day, Jamal left the classroom feeling lighter. It wasn't just the reassurance he'd needed, it was the reminder that it was okay to stumble, to make mistakes, to be imperfect. He didn't have to be the math prodigy or the perfect student. He could just be himself, with all his flaws and aspirations. The next few weeks passed with Jamal continuing to focus on his personal growth. He worked hard on his schoolwork, but he also spent more time with his friends, especially Maya, who had become a solid rock in his life. They had gotten closer over the past few months, and it was becoming clear that they shared something deeper than friendship. It was the kind of connection that went beyond words, something unspoken but undeniably real. One Friday afternoon, Jamal sat on the bleachers of the school gymnasium, watching Maya practice for the upcoming track meet. She was fast, focused, and graceful, and Jamal couldn't help but admire her determination. She finished a lap and jogged over to him, breathing heavily but smiling. "Hey, what's up? You look deep in thought." Jamal grinned. "Just thinking about how you're going to crush that race tomorrow." Maya laughed, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I hope so. I've been practicing for weeks, so now it's just about putting everything together." Jamal nodded, his smile softening. "You've got this. You've always had it in you." Maya tilted her head, her expression curious. "What about you? You're always so focused on school, but what do you want to do with your life?" Jamal paused, the question catching him off guard. He had spent so much time trying to live up to everyone else's expectations that he hadn't really asked himself that question in a long time. "I don't know," Jamal admitted, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "I've been so focused on what other people think of me that I haven't really stopped to figure out what I want for myself. I'm not just this kid who can solve problems or win competitions. I'm still trying to figure it out." Maya sat next to him, her presence calming. "That's okay. I think everyone's still trying to figure it out. But you don't have to have everything figured out right now. It's okay to take it one step at a time." Jamal looked at her, her words sinking in. "Yeah. I guess I'm learning that. I'm starting to feel like maybe it's okay to not have everything planned out perfectly. I'm just trying to focus on the next right step." Maya smiled, her eyes bright. "Exactly. And I think you're doing great, Jamal. Just keep being true to yourself. That's all that really matters." Later that week, Jamal found himself back in Mr. Harris's class, feeling the weight of a new understanding settle over him. He had been so focused on being the best, on living up to everyone's expectations, that he had missed the point of learning in the first place. It wasn't about perfection, it was about the journey, about growth, about trusting yourself through every misstep and every victory, no matter how small. Mr. Harris caught him looking a little more contemplative than usual and gave him a knowing smile. "You know, Jamal, I can see the change in you. You've been holding back before, but I think you're starting to realize your own potential. It's been great to see you grow." Jamal's heart swelled with gratitude. He had been afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being seen as less than perfect. But now, with Mr. Harris's guidance, Maya's friendship, and his own growing self-awareness, Jamal was beginning to understand something truly powerful, that the path to success wasn't linear or flawless. It was about learning from every challenge, taking each step with humility, and knowing that it was okay to ask for help along the way. As the weeks went on, Jamal found himself embracing the discomfort of change, leaning into the lessons that life was teaching him. With every setback and every triumph, he grew stronger, more confident in who he was and where he was going. As the school year started to wind down, Jamal was in a better place than he'd ever been before. He had made peace with his father, discovered a new sense of self through his friendship with Maya, and had begun to really understand what it meant to be truly present in his own life. But as much as Jamal felt like he had gained control over his internal struggles, there was one obstacle he couldn't quite shake: the fear of failure. It wasn't a fear he could easily explain. He had always been a perfectionist, driven by the desire to be the best in everything he did. But lately, the pressure had started to feel different. It was more than just wanting to succeed, it was the overwhelming fear of what would happen if he didn't. What would happen if, despite all his efforts, he fell short? One day, after a long week of studying for finals and trying to juggle his responsibilities, Jamal found himself sitting on the edge of the roof of the school, the cool evening air brushing against his face. It had become his spot, his place to escape and think. Maya had told him about her own struggles with fear and pressure. She had been dealing with the anxiety of performing well at the track meet, afraid that if she didn't win, her whole identity would crumble. Jamal had listened, offering his support, but he realized now that he wasn't all that different from her. Both of them had been carrying this weight of expectations, but the fear wasn't just about winning or succeeding, it was about living up to an invisible standard that was self-imposed. Jamal closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as the wind whipped around him. He was exhausted, mentally and physically. Everything in his life had been about proving something to someone, whether it was his father, his teachers, or himself. He had poured so much energy into his image and the expectations others had for him, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to just be free of all that pressure. "Hey," a voice called out, pulling Jamal from his thoughts. He opened his eyes to see Mr. Harris standing at the top of the stairs leading up to the roof. His expression was calm, almost like he'd known Jamal needed someone to talk to. "Mr. Harris, what are you doing here?" Jamal asked, surprised. Mr. Harris chuckled softly. "I figured I'd come check on you. You've been working hard lately, and I can tell there's something weighing on you." Jamal shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just the usual. Finals are coming up, and I'm feeling the pressure." "I can see that," Mr. Harris said, walking closer and sitting down beside him. "But I don't think that's all it is, Jamal. I think you're scared." Jamal froze. He wasn't used to having people so easily see through his walls. "Scared? What do you mean?" "Fear of failure," Mr. Harris said simply. "It's something I know well. You've been doing everything you can to make sure you never fall short. But sometimes, the fear of falling short becomes bigger than the fear of trying in the first place." Jamal looked down, trying to process Mr. Harris's words. He had never really thought about it like that. It wasn't just that he was afraid of failing, it was that he had been afraid of even trying because he couldn't handle the thought of not succeeding. "I've been running from it," Jamal admitted quietly. "Running from the idea that I might not be enough. I've been so caught up in trying to be perfect that I forgot how to just be." Mr. Harris nodded, his expression understanding. "I get that. I've seen it a lot, especially in students who have so much potential. You're so focused on getting everything right that you don't give yourself the freedom to just live in the moment. And you know what? No one expects you to be perfect, Jamal. Not me, not your friends, not even your father. You've got to let go of that expectation, because that's where your real power lies." Jamal felt the weight of Mr. Harris's words sink in. It was a hard truth to swallow. He had always tried to live up to an impossible standard, not realizing that it was slowly suffocating him. What if the only person holding him back was himself? What if, in order to truly move forward, he needed to embrace his imperfections instead of running from them? "But what if I mess up?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I fail? What if I let everyone down?" "You're not perfect, Jamal," Mr. Harris replied gently. "But that doesn't mean you won't succeed. The truth is, everyone fails at something. It's how you handle that failure that defines you, not the failure itself. And the people who care about you, the people who truly matter, will still be there. They'll still support you, no matter what." Jamal's chest tightened, but there was a sense of relief in Mr. Harris's words. It wasn't the kind of rah-rah pep talk he had heard from others. It was real. Mr. Harris was giving him permission to be human. "Just take the risk, Jamal," Mr. Harris continued. "Sometimes, the road less traveled is the one that leads to the greatest growth. You've been playing it safe for so long, trying to meet everyone's expectations. It's time to step outside of that and see what happens when you let go of the fear and just be." Jamal sat in silence, letting the weight of those words wash over him. For so long, he had been trapped by his own need to be perfect. But now, he was beginning to realize that the true freedom wasn't in being flawless, it was in being authentic, even when it was scary. As he stood up, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows over the rooftop, Jamal felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt before. It wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about being willing to fail, to take risks, and to grow from them. The fear would always be there, but it no longer had to control him. "Thanks, Mr. Harris," Jamal said, his voice steadier now. "I think I finally get it." Mr. Harris smiled, standing up beside him. "Good. Now go out there and live your life. Whatever happens, you're going to be just fine." As Jamal walked down the stairs and out into the evening, he felt a sense of lightness. The weight of expectations had been lifted, replaced by something much more powerful, the freedom to be himself, imperfections and all. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to be everything to everyone. He just had to be true to himself, take risks, and trust that the journey would be worth it, even if it meant stumbling along the way. For the first time in a long while, Jamal wasn't afraid to fail. And that was exactly what he needed to move forward. As Jamal moved into the final stretch of his high school journey, his sense of self continued to evolve. He had worked through his fears, developed a deeper understanding of his strengths and weaknesses, and, most importantly, learned to accept that imperfection was part of the human experience. But with graduation just around the corner, Jamal now faced a new and daunting challenge, the decision of what came next. Maya had been accepted to several prestigious track programs, and she was preparing to sign with one of them, leaving the small town and embarking on a journey of her own. Jamal, meanwhile, had kept his college applications on the back burner. He hadn't made a final decision, unsure of whether he should follow the path that seemed most expected or chart his own course. The fear of failure still lingered, but now it was wrapped up in the uncertainty of the future. It wasn't just about the present anymore, it was about what he could become and what he wanted his life to look like. One evening, a week before the final exams, Jamal sat at his desk, the dim glow of his desk lamp illuminating a mountain of textbooks and notes. Maya had left for a weekend training camp, and Jamal was alone with his thoughts. The walls of his room felt like they were closing in, and the pressure to make a decision about his future felt overwhelming. As he flipped through his biology textbook, his mind began to wander. What if he went to the same college his father had attended? It was a safe bet, a path he knew would meet his father's expectations. But Jamal's gut told him that this wasn't the right path for him. He had already walked in the shadow of others for so long, his father's expectations, the school's desire for him to be the perfect student, and the pressure to keep up with the people around him. But what did he want? The question hovered in the air, unanswered and heavy, like an anchor holding him back. He stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The world outside was still and peaceful, but his heart was racing. It was like everything was calling him to take a step into the unknown, into something that didn't come with a guarantee. A new life, a new adventure, one that was entirely his own. The next day, Jamal sought out Mr. Harris after class. He had been struggling with the same question for weeks, and it was time to get some guidance. "Mr. Harris," Jamal began, his voice unsure. "I've been thinking a lot about my future, and I don't know what to do. Everyone expects me to follow the path that's been laid out for me, but I'm not sure if it's what I really want." Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. "You're at a crossroads, Jamal. I can see that. The truth is, there's no right or wrong answer. The most important thing is to listen to what's inside you, to what feels right for you." Jamal frowned. "But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I go down the wrong path and regret it later?" "That's a fear everyone has," Mr. Harris said gently. "The thing is, there's no perfect choice. There's only the choice that feels authentic to who you are right now. And sometimes, the road less traveled is the one that leads to the most profound growth. If you're always choosing the safe path, you'll never learn what you're truly capable of." Jamal felt a sense of weight lift from his shoulders as Mr. Harris spoke. It wasn't about perfection, it wasn't about always making the right decision, it was about taking the next step, trusting in the process, and knowing that growth often came from the unexpected. "What's the next step for you, Jamal?" Mr. Harris asked, his voice calm but probing. "What feels right? Not what anyone else expects, but what you feel in your gut." Jamal took a deep breath, closing his eyes. His heart raced, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was the excitement of possibility. "I think I need to take a risk," Jamal said slowly, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I need to follow my own path, even if it's scary. I've spent so much of my life living up to other people's expectations. I think I need to figure out who I am outside of all that." Mr. Harris smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. "That's the courage I've been waiting to see, Jamal. You're starting to trust yourself. Remember, it's okay to not have all the answers right now. What matters is that you start moving forward with confidence, even if you don't know exactly where the road leads. You'll figure it out along the way." Jamal nodded, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't had before. He had spent so much time avoiding uncertainty, trying to make the right decisions based on what others expected, that he hadn't given himself the freedom to take risks. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to leap into the unknown. The next morning, Jamal did something he hadn't thought he would do. He withdrew his application to the college his father had attended and submitted an application to a small, unconventional school across the country. It wasn't the safe choice. It wasn't the choice his father would have preferred. But it felt right for him. It was a place where he could explore his own passions and interests, free from the weight of expectations. When Jamal told Maya about his decision that night, she smiled and hugged him. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," she said. "You're finally listening to your heart. That's the best thing you can do for yourself." Later that evening, Jamal sat down with his father, heart pounding. He had prepared for this moment, knowing that his father would be disappointed, perhaps even angry. But as he told him about his decision to attend the new school, Jamal was surprised by his father's reaction. "You know, son," his father said after a long pause, "I may not always understand your decisions, but I can see that you're thinking for yourself now. That's all I ever wanted. I don't want you to live in my shadow. I want you to find your own way." Jamal's heart swelled. For the first time, he felt like his father truly saw him for who he was, not just as the son who needed to meet expectations, but as an individual with his own dreams and aspirations. As Jamal lay in bed that night, thinking about the future, he realized that he was finally stepping into his own life. He had chosen a path that felt right for him, not for anyone else. It was scary, but it was also the most freeing thing he had ever done. For the first time, Jamal was excited about the future, not because it was certain, but because it was full of possibility. As the end of the school year drew closer, the buzz of graduation and the uncertain future loomed large over Jamal's head. His decision to attend a smaller, less conventional college had sent shockwaves through his life. It was a leap of faith, and while he had felt a surge of clarity when making the decision, the reality of it began to settle in. Leaving behind everything he had known, his friends, the town, and even the weight of his father's expectations, was not as simple as he had imagined. The excitement was there, but so was a creeping sense of doubt. Jamal found himself spending more time at home during the final days before graduation, trying to sort through his thoughts. The letters from the college he had chosen had come in, confirming his acceptance. But despite the excitement he had once felt, now there was fear. He questioned whether he had made the right choice. Was he really ready for this step into the unknown? His last few days at school were filled with a mixture of emotions, bittersweet goodbyes to friends, teachers, and the life he had built. Maya was, as always, the one person who seemed to understand him best. "I'm going to miss you so much," Maya said one evening as the two of them sat in their favorite spot in the school courtyard. The sun was setting, casting golden hues across the sky, and the quiet was a reminder of how much had changed over the past few months. "I'm going to miss you too," Jamal replied, but the words didn't seem to convey all the emotions he was feeling. Saying goodbye to her felt harder than he anticipated. Maya had been a constant in his life, his friend, his confidant, his partner in crime. Now, they were both heading in different directions, chasing their own dreams. "You've come so far," Maya said, giving him a soft smile. "And I know you're scared, but this is your moment. You've earned it. Don't let fear stop you now." Jamal nodded, though a part of him still felt conflicted. How could he leave everything behind? How could he trust himself enough to make this leap when so much was uncertain? The next day, Jamal found himself in his father's study. His father had been quieter lately, and Jamal had been avoiding a serious conversation about his decision to leave for college. Now, it was inevitable. He had to tell his father face to face. "Dad," Jamal started, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about my future, and I've made my decision. I'm going to go to that college in California. It's where I think I can really grow and figure out who I am." His father looked up from his desk, where he had been reviewing some documents. For a moment, Jamal wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. There was a long silence between them, and Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. Finally, his father spoke. "I see." His voice was calm, but there was something unreadable in his expression. Jamal braced himself for the disappointment, for the anger that he knew was coming. But it didn't. "You're not angry?" Jamal asked, surprised. His father stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the street below. "I'm not angry, Jamal. I'll be honest. I had hoped you would follow in my footsteps, that you would attend the same college I did. But you're not me. And I think you're ready to carve your own path. This isn't easy for me, but I understand. I want you to follow your dreams. And I'll support you." Jamal felt his chest tighten, a mixture of relief and fear flooding over him. He hadn't expected this. His father's approval, especially in this moment, meant more than he could express. But now that it was given, Jamal knew he had no more excuses. The decision had been made. It was time to move forward. "Thanks, Dad," Jamal said quietly. "It means a lot to me." His father nodded, turning back to him. "Just don't forget where you came from, son. No matter how far you go, you'll always have a home here." Jamal smiled, his heart swelling. He had never felt more understood by his father. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough to give him the confidence to step out into the world on his own terms. As the days passed, Jamal began to prepare for his departure. The process of packing up his life, of leaving his room behind, was more emotional than he had anticipated. Every item he packed felt like a memory he was trying to preserve. The pictures on his walls, the posters of his favorite athletes, the books he had collected, everything was tied to the person he used to be, the person who had struggled to define himself. Now, it was time for a new chapter. The day before he left, Maya came over to say her final goodbyes. They sat together in his room, talking about everything and nothing, as they had done so many times before. "I don't know how I'm going to do this without you," Maya admitted, her eyes a little misty. "You've been there for me through everything. It's going to be weird without you around." Jamal squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. But we'll both figure it out. We're both heading in different directions, but that doesn't mean we can't still be there for each other." "Of course," Maya said, nodding. "I'll always be here if you need me." Jamal smiled, feeling the bond between them strengthen even as the distance between them grew. "And I'll be there for you, too. No matter where life takes us." With one last hug, Jamal said goodbye to Maya. As he stood in the doorway, watching her walk away, he realized that saying goodbye wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new journey for both of them. The world was bigger now, filled with opportunities and challenges. And Jamal was ready to face them all, one step at a time. Jamal's first morning at the college in California felt surreal. The cool morning air, the vibrant campus, the vast horizon stretching out before him, it all felt so different from the small town he had grown up in. The concrete jungle of the city was starkly contrasted with the wide-open spaces he had always known. The first step was done, but now, a new chapter awaited him, one that was entirely his own. He woke up early, as he had always done back home. The only difference now was that it wasn't his old room that greeted him but a sparse dorm room with white walls and a bed that was too small for comfort. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and new linens, a reminder that he was in a place that was brand new, a place where he could define who he was. As Jamal stood in front of the mirror, he adjusted his clothes, a simple hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy. He had never been one for drawing attention, but here, on this new campus, it felt like everyone was searching for something different, something unique. He couldn't help but feel a little out of place. There was a knock on his door, pulling him from his thoughts. He opened it to find his roommate, Tyler, a tall, wiry guy with a mop of curly hair, grinning at him. "You ready to go?" Tyler asked, his voice upbeat. Jamal hesitated for a moment, still feeling the weight of uncertainty, but then he nodded. "Yeah, I think so." "All right, man. Let's grab some breakfast and get to class. It's time to dive in." The two of them walked through the dormitory hallways, exchanging small talk. Tyler was from a small town in Oregon, and Jamal was starting to learn that no matter where people came from, the feeling of starting fresh on a college campus was universal. Everyone had their own story, their own reasons for being here, but the one thing they all shared was the excitement and fear of the unknown. The campus was buzzing with energy. Students hustled across walkways, talking in groups, laughing, or plugged into their own worlds with headphones. The sun was shining brightly, casting a golden light over the buildings and lawns. The air smelled different, clean, crisp, and full of possibility. Jamal felt a nervous flutter in his chest. The vastness of this new world, the unfamiliarity of it all, it was a lot to take in. But it was also exhilarating. He had chosen this, and now he was here. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back. Tyler led him to a small, bustling cafeteria where they grabbed breakfast. The line was long, filled with students from all walks of life. Jamal couldn't help but notice the diversity of the campus. There were people of every race, background, and culture, so many voices, so many stories. For the first time, Jamal felt like he wasn't just one of many, he was part of something much larger, something that embraced all the differences and complexities of life. They sat at a table near the window, and Tyler immediately started chatting with a couple of people he recognized. Jamal, on the other hand, sat quietly, observing the dynamic around him. There was something intimidating about being in a room full of strangers, all of them seemingly so confident in their own identities. But as the morning went on, Jamal started to relax. He realized that everyone was, in some way, trying to figure things out. Whether it was their first day on campus or their fourth year, they were all navigating a new chapter in their lives. It wasn't just about fitting in, it was about carving out a place where they could be themselves. After breakfast, Tyler led Jamal to their first lecture, Introduction to Philosophy. As they walked into the lecture hall, Jamal's nerves kicked in again. This was it, the real test. He had chosen this class because he was curious about the world, about the big questions that had always fascinated him. But now, standing in front of the massive room filled with students, it felt more intimidating than ever. Tyler grabbed a seat in the middle of the room, gesturing for Jamal to join him. Jamal sat down, pulling his notebook out of his bag and trying to calm his racing heart. As the professor walked in, the room fell silent. "Good morning, everyone," the professor said, her voice warm but authoritative. "I'm Dr. Langston, and I'll be guiding you through the fundamental questions of life. Our goal this semester is not to find all the answers, but to learn how to ask the right questions." Jamal felt a sense of intrigue spark within him. This was why he had come here, to ask questions, to challenge his own thinking, and to grow. As the lecture began, Jamal found himself absorbed in the discussion. They talked about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, about the nature of knowledge and reality. The ideas were heady and complex, but for the first time in a long while, Jamal felt intellectually challenged in a way that excited him. He had never been one to shy away from deep thinking, but in high school, he had often felt limited by the structure of the system. Now, in this college setting, it felt like there were no limits. After class, Tyler turned to Jamal with a grin. "See? Not so bad, right?" Jamal smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Yeah, actually, it was pretty great. I think I'm really going to like this." They walked out of the lecture hall together, the weight of the first day slowly lifting from Jamal's chest. The campus felt less intimidating now, more like a place he could call his own. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, but it had transformed into something more manageable, something he could work through. That night, as Jamal sat in his dorm room, reflecting on the day, he felt a sense of pride. He had taken the first step into the unknown, and although the path ahead was still unclear, he knew one thing for certain: he was where he was meant to be. He had made the right decision, and now it was time to take full advantage of this new beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Jamal settled into a routine. He attended classes, made new friends, and found himself enjoying the freedom and opportunities that college life offered. His academic performance was solid, he was doing well in his philosophy class, where his discussions had already begun to stand out. He had the drive and the passion to excel, but Jamal knew that he couldn't just coast by. College was about pushing his limits and proving that he could not only survive here but thrive. One afternoon, as Jamal was walking out of his calculus class, he overheard a conversation between two students. They were talking about a competition, the annual math challenge that the college held, a contest where the brightest students from various departments competed in solving complex problems. The conversation caught his attention. He had always enjoyed math, though it had never been his primary focus. It was something he excelled at without really trying, an innate ability that had often led to him acing tests in high school. But now, he was surrounded by students who were just as gifted, if not more so. The competition wasn't just a way to show off, it was a challenge, an opportunity to prove himself in a completely new arena. "Are you entering?" one of the students asked, turning to his friend. "I'm thinking about it," his friend replied. "But I don't know if I'll be able to keep up. The problems are intense, and they really test your limits." Jamal's curiosity was piqued. He didn't consider himself a math prodigy, but he knew he had the potential. He was always up for a challenge, especially one that would push him beyond his comfort zone. Later that night, as Jamal sat in his dorm room, he thought about the conversation. The idea of competing in the math challenge sparked something inside him. It was a chance to prove that he wasn't just a student here to get by. He wanted to prove that he could stand out in a field that wasn't even his main focus. But deep down, he felt the pressure of being one of the few black students in a department dominated by people who had been trained for years to think in a more structured, rigid way. Jamal had always been the underdog. Even back home, he had often been overlooked, underestimated, or doubted by others who thought he wasn't capable of more. But here, in this new environment, Jamal was determined to change that. He wasn't going to let anyone, especially himself, hold him back. The next day, Jamal signed up for the math challenge. His decision wasn't met with much fanfare. His roommate, Tyler, who was more focused on his own studies, didn't think much of it. "You're seriously going to do this?" Tyler asked, looking up from his laptop. Jamal shrugged. "Yeah, why not? I need something to prove to myself. I want to test my limits." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "I mean, if you think you're up for it. But, dude, it's gonna be tough. These problems are next level. Some of the best math students from all over the country compete in this." Jamal nodded, the challenge now fully setting in. "I'm ready for it." As the competition day approached, Jamal threw himself into his studies. Every free moment was spent solving problems, revisiting old math concepts, and pushing himself to think in new ways. He spent hours in the library, trying to wrap his head around problems that at first seemed impossible. His professors noticed his dedication, and while some were impressed, others remained skeptical. Professor Harris, his calculus instructor, pulled him aside after class one day. "I see you've signed up for the math challenge," she said, her tone measured. "I'll be honest, Jamal. This is not a competition for the faint of heart. You're talented, no doubt, but I'm not sure if you understand just how difficult this will be. It might be better to focus on your core classes and let the more experienced students take this on." Jamal felt his heart race. It wasn't the first time he had felt underestimated, but this time, it stung. Professor Harris had been one of the few who had shown real interest in his work. She had praised him for his enthusiasm in class, but now, she was questioning his abilities. "I can handle it," Jamal said, his voice steady, though his mind raced with self-doubt. "I'm ready to give it my all." Professor Harris studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "I admire your determination, Jamal. Just don't let pride get in the way of your education. Be prepared for what's to come." Jamal nodded, but inside, he felt a fire ignite. He wasn't going to let anyone define his limits. This was his chance to prove that he was more than the labels others had put on him, more than the doubts that had been placed in his path. When the day of the competition arrived, Jamal felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. He walked into the auditorium, where the challenge was being held, and was immediately struck by the intensity of the atmosphere. Students sat at tables, working furiously on complex equations and problems, their faces a mix of concentration and determination. Jamal sat down at a table, surrounded by students who had come from prestigious schools and specialized math programs. He felt a sense of being out of his element, but that feeling only fueled his resolve. This wasn't just a contest, it was a chance to prove something to himself and to everyone who had ever doubted him. As the problems were handed out, Jamal dove in. The first few problems were difficult, but he tackled them with methodical precision. There was a rhythm to it, a flow. But as the time ticked down, the problems grew more difficult, more intricate. Jamal's mind raced as he worked through complex formulas and abstract concepts. His heart pounded, but he refused to slow down. He knew this was his moment. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the competition. Jamal sat back, exhausted but satisfied. He didn't know if he had won, he wasn't sure if he even had all the right answers, but he knew one thing, he had given it everything he had. As the results were announced, Jamal held his breath. His heart pounded in his chest, each second feeling like an eternity. When his name was finally called, he couldn't believe it. He had placed in the top 5. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jamal barely heard it. His mind was still racing, processing the fact that he had done it, that he had proven not only to others but also to himself that he was capable of greatness. The day after the math challenge, Jamal woke up feeling like a different person. It wasn't just the thrill of placing in the top 5, it was the realization that he had exceeded his own expectations. He had set out to prove something, not to anyone else, but to himself, and now, he could breathe a little easier. It felt like he had broken through a barrier, something that had once seemed insurmountable. As he walked across campus, Jamal felt a sense of pride and confidence that he hadn't experienced before. The looks he received from his peers, the congratulatory pats on the back, all of it filled him with a quiet satisfaction. But it was more than just recognition, it was a new understanding of his own abilities. He was no longer just the kid from the small town, he was someone who belonged here, in this world of intellect and challenges. That afternoon, Jamal met with his philosophy professor, Dr. Langston. She had always been supportive of his intellectual curiosity, and Jamal had felt comfortable in her class, especially with the way she encouraged open discussion and exploration of difficult ideas. But today, he had something else on his mind. He walked into her office, and she looked up from a stack of papers on her desk, offering him a warm smile. "Well, look who's here. How are you, Jamal?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm good, Dr. Langston," he replied. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." She leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Jamal paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to thank you," he began, "for encouraging me to think outside the box in your class. I think it's why I was able to do well in the math challenge. I didn't think I'd make it past the first round, honestly. But I did. And now, I realize that I've been holding myself back, not just in math but in everything." Dr. Langston raised an eyebrow, impressed. "I'm glad to hear that. What do you mean by holding yourself back?" Jamal leaned back in his chair, feeling a sudden surge of vulnerability. "I've always been afraid of not fitting in. Afraid that people would look at me and see only the stereotype, see the black kid who's supposed to be good at sports but not at math or philosophy. I think I've been trying to prove everyone wrong for so long that I forgot to just prove it to myself." Dr. Langston sat back, her expression thoughtful. "Jamal, you're not the only one who feels that way. It's easy to get caught up in what others expect of you, and sometimes, we become so focused on meeting those expectations that we forget to define our own path. But it's not about proving anything to anyone, it's about embracing who you are and what you're capable of. You've already shown that you can rise above the challenges placed in front of you." Jamal nodded, the weight of her words settling in. It was the truth he had been avoiding for so long, he had been running a race that wasn't his to run. Now, he was ready to start running his own. Later that day, Jamal walked back to his dorm room with a new sense of clarity. He felt lighter somehow, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time, he wasn't concerned with living up to anyone's expectations. He was only concerned with living up to his own. That evening, he sat at his desk, reflecting on everything that had led him here, from the small town to the big city, from the doubters to the moments of self-doubt. And he realized that each challenge, each moment of uncertainty, had been a stepping stone, a lesson that had shaped him into someone stronger, more self-assured. Jamal pulled out his philosophy notebook and started scribbling ideas down, his thoughts flowing more freely now. He no longer felt like an outsider in his own life. College had become his stage, his opportunity to shape his future on his terms. But there was still one thing that nagged at him, the looming question of what came next. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't even about excelling. Now, Jamal was determined to discover his purpose, to find that deeper meaning that had eluded him for so long. The math challenge had been a stepping stone, but it was just the beginning. There was so much more he wanted to accomplish, so many more boundaries he was ready to break. The next day, as he walked through campus, Jamal spotted his old friend, Aliyah, from back home. She had transferred to the college a few weeks ago, and they had promised to catch up. Aliyah had always been a source of support for Jamal. They had grown up together, shared their dreams and insecurities, and now, they were both on this new journey, in the same place but with different paths ahead. "Jamal. Over here." Aliyah called out, waving from a bench beneath a tree. Jamal smiled and walked over to her, sitting down beside her. "It's good to see you," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You too," Aaliyah replied. "So, how's it going? How's college life treating you?" "It's been a roller coaster," Jamal admitted. "But I think I'm finally getting the hang of it. I'm not just here to survive anymore, I'm here to figure out what I really want to do." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what's that?" Jamal paused for a moment, the answer clear in his mind. "I want to make an impact. I want to do something that matters, something that goes beyond just getting by. I want to prove that I'm capable of more than what people expect." Aaliyah nodded, her expression understanding. "I get it. You're not just proving it to them, you're proving it to yourself. And trust me, you've got what it takes." As they sat there, talking about their experiences and their dreams, Jamal realized that this connection, this clarity, was exactly what he had been searching for. He wasn't alone on this journey. He had people who believed in him, and more importantly, he was beginning to believe in himself. The weeks following Jamal's breakthrough felt like an entirely new chapter of his life. It was as though everything had fallen into place, like he was finally starting to understand who he was and what he wanted from his future. The math challenge had been a pivotal moment, a test not just of his mathematical abilities but of his own self-doubt and limitations. Now, Jamal was ready to fully embrace his potential and take the next step toward the future he had always dreamed of. The end of the semester was fast approaching, and Jamal's academic journey had taken on a new intensity. He was no longer just going through the motions, he was actively pursuing his passions. He spent hours in the library, delving deeper into the subjects that intrigued him most, philosophy, math, and even sociology, where he began exploring the social constructs that had shaped his own identity. For the first time, his education felt like a personal journey, a quest to understand himself and the world around him. It was a Thursday afternoon when Jamal received an email that changed everything. He had been selected for an internship at a prestigious research institution that focused on solving real-world problems through advanced mathematics and innovative social theories. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to make a tangible impact, to apply everything he had learned in college in a meaningful way. The email was short and to the point, but to Jamal, it felt like a door opening into a future he had only dreamed about. He stared at the screen, unsure whether to believe it. "Is this real?" he whispered to himself. After a few moments, his hands trembled as he clicked on the reply button and accepted the offer. There was no turning back now. Jamal's first day at the research institution was overwhelming. He walked into the building, which was filled with bustling researchers, all immersed in their work. The place had an energy unlike anything he had ever experienced, intense, focused, and full of possibility. He was introduced to his supervisor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a woman whose intellect was only matched by her compassion. She welcomed him with open arms, acknowledging his accomplishments and encouraging him to think critically, push boundaries, and ask questions. As the weeks passed, Jamal dove headfirst into the work. He tackled complex data analysis, applied advanced mathematical models to real-world scenarios, and collaborated with a team of like-minded individuals who shared his drive to make a difference. But it wasn't just the work that inspired him, it was the conversations, the exchange of ideas, and the camaraderie that made Jamal feel like he was part of something greater than himself. He was no longer the kid trying to prove something. He was now a part of a community that saw him for who he truly was, someone with a passion for knowledge and a desire to make an impact. During one of his late-night study sessions, Jamal received a text from Aaliyah. She had been following his journey closely and was just as proud of his accomplishments as he was. "Hey, Jamal, I was thinking about you today. I know you've been killing it at the internship, and I just wanted to say that you've come so far. Remember when we used to talk about dreams back in high school? You're living yours now." Jamal smiled at the message, feeling a warmth in his chest. Aaliyah had always believed in him, even when he hadn't fully believed in himself. She was right, he was living his dream, even though it didn't look exactly like what he had imagined all those years ago. It was better. That weekend, Jamal returned to his hometown for a visit. It had been a while since he had seen his family and friends, and he was eager to reconnect. The moment he stepped off the bus, his mother was there waiting for him, her arms wide open. She had always been his biggest cheerleader, even when life seemed uncertain. "You're home," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, Jamal. You've come so far." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." They spent the day catching up, sharing stories, and laughing together. Jamal realized how much he had changed since he had left this town. The boy who had once been afraid of being judged was now someone who could walk into a room full of strangers and hold his own. He had learned to embrace who he was, flaws, strengths, and everything in between. That evening, Jamal sat down with his old friends, the ones who had always been there for him through thick and thin. They gathered at a local diner, reminiscing about the good old days. His friends were amazed by his success, and they couldn't stop talking about how proud they were of him. "You've really turned things around, man," one of his friends said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were always smart, but now you're doing big things." Jamal smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "It wasn't always easy," he admitted. "But I've learned that the most important thing is to keep pushing forward, no matter what anyone thinks. It's not about proving others wrong, it's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you ever imagined." As the evening came to a close, Jamal stood up to leave. He looked around the diner, at his friends, his family, and his hometown, and he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had come full circle, from the uncertain teenager to the confident young adult ready to make a difference. He had proven himself in ways he never thought possible, not just to the world, but to himself. Before he left, he texted Aaliyah one last time, "I'm starting to think that maybe the biggest challenge we face isn't the problems in front of us, but the doubts inside of us. Once you face those, everything else just falls into place." Jamal got on the bus back to campus the next morning with a smile on his face. The journey had only just begun, but he was ready for whatever came next. Whatever the future held, he knew he could face it head-on, armed with the confidence that had always been within him. The doubts were gone. And now, all that was left was the limitless potential of what he could achieve. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?